You are listening to the Enormocast. At Black Diamond, the process of building gear begins and ends with climbing. A need drives an idea, and that idea is tweaked, tested, and refined in a never-ending cycle. Use, design, engineer, build, repeat. Guided by this philosophy, Black Diamond has been making equipment for the full spectrum of climbing pursuits for more than 25 years. From the boulders to the big walls and everything in between, Black Diamond makes gear and apparel you can trust when it matters.
Visit blackdiamondequipment.com to check out the latest all-new gear, as well as a fine-tuned collection of apparel, and get the latest stories, photos, and videos on their blog, Black Diamond Experience. How's that for a Pro-Sesh commercial? Eh?
We gotta get
Listen, where are you playing in town? Are you playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah, the big
house.
place,
sold
that
it out.
side of town. That's a big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000
seats.
You really should.
Look, you better get up there before he panics. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Bad weather. Now or later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And don't forget, you can go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout to get a discount on great coffee. And you can go to pureholds.com and enter Enormo to get a discount on great Colorado-made climbing holds. Both the coffee and the holds will give you the power to crush your enemies and see them driven before you.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is about 8 o'clock Mountain Standard Time on January 5th, 2015, the first episode of the new year coming at you. Episode 72, a conversation with Enormo Nation favorite Kelly Cordes. And Kelly and I sat down to talk about his new book, The Tower, A Chronicle of Climbing. No, wait a second. A Chronicle of Climbing and Controversy on Cerro Torre. A lot of alliteration in that title. So there's been a lot of new fans coming on board. Been hearing from a lot of new people, binging through the back catalog. So I'm going to do everyone a favor. My little gift to you in the new year is shutting up. I talked too much in this one already. So let's just get to it. Distinguished author, Kelly Cordes.
Are you saying my margarita will put hair on your chest?
Yes.
Take it from your bald head and put it on your chest. Dude, I'm turning to you. I got a patch on my scalp where my hair's falling out, man.
Really?
Yeah, it's fucking weird.
It's the stress.
Man, it's been so nice to not be writing anymore. I'm not writing again for the rest of my life, and it's been such a relief. After all the stress, I just sit and talk shit. And I took a job, dude. First full-time job, 46 years old.
Well, really?
Yep.
Well, doing what?
I know, yeah. I saw the air of disappointment in your voice there.
Einstein Bagels, or what are we talking about?
Well, I had that. I might have told you I had that liquor store help wanted sticker sign posted on above my computer monitor. Oh. There's a good story about the stress of the book, and the one day, midday, I'm like, fuck this, and I walk, the liquor store's right across the street from my house. There's this help wanted sign on the door, and I just fucking stand there for a while staring at it like, oh man. And then I finally came around, I'm like, nah dude, you gotta stay with this book thing. And I took a picture of it and printed it out and put it on my desk, or it's still taped to my computer monitor, and the idea was that it would remind me, to do a good job with this book, or else I'm going to end up working in a fucking liquor store. But then as the stress built during the book, I started to just long for the liquor store. I was like, I want out. I just want to bail. This is too much work, too much research. The research was interesting, but the writing was just desperate. I mean, for me, writing was really hard. I don't know if it's the same for you, but I think for most people who care about their writing, it's not easy.
All right, so we're in. So I'm sitting in a secret location in Boulder, Colorado, on the southern side of Boulder, Colorado, with Kelly Cordes has returned to the show after many people have bugged me about having you on the show again. It's been, you're on like episode 9 or something was the last one.
Yeah, it was an early one. I can't remember.
Oh, no, then you were on the live one at the...
right. Well, and we did the one in the Climb Lab, or your version of the Climb Lab, your mobile studio, your RV.
Well, that was earlier, though.
Oh, was it?
That was like episode 3.
I'm getting old.
That one when I met you at Hayden's place.
Ah, that's right.
Then you came back and we did it in the parking lot before going into 5 Point. And then you were on the live show. Then it was the following year. So I don't know what episode that is. It's in the 20s. But anyway, welcome back to the
Thanks,
Enormocast,
dude.
Kelly. We are here on the occasion.
There we go.
We're podcast shaking hands. We are here on the occasion of the release of your book, which was last month or in November.
About a month ago. Yeah, it was about a month ago.
A book about Cerro Torre called what? It's the Tower, and then it has...
the subtitle is A Chronicle of Climbing and Controversy on Cerro Torre.
Okay. Which is cool, because the Enormocast actually is cited in the bibliography, I noticed. I went and looked, because I believe when I was reading some of the quotes, Hayden's quotes, I think a couple of them are from the show, which is awesome. But it's a big part of the Enormocast, because those were like episodes 6 and 7.
Those were two of the best episodes ever, man. Those were amazing episodes.
Well, they turned out great, but also because A, it was Hayden, and B, it was this. One of the few times like the Enormocast was timely, and what happened was, and I don't know if I've ever really explained this on the show, but Hayden Kennedy went and he ended up chopping the compressor route. I don't want to review the whole thing. A big part of your book, because this book covers that route as well as Maestri's original claim to have climbed it in 1959.
Way back, yep.
And when that happened, the whole shitstorm came down on my little friend Hayden, and who I've known since 8th grade or whatever, since he was in 8th grade. And when he was in the middle of this shitstorm, and some people calling him a hero, and a lot of people call him an asshole, and all that. And I talked to him and I said, "Hey, look, dude, this is what's going to happen. I want you to come on the show, and I want you to tell your side of it." And he was really nervous to do that, and with good reason, because if you turned on the internet, if you just flicked the internet switch on it, like a big pile of shit just fell on your head, But nevertheless, I was like, look, if you come on and you talk about this, and you give your reasoning, and people hear who you are, where you guys were coming from, how the history of it all kind of came together. People may not agree with you any more than they did before, but at least they were going to have to take 3 hours and listen to you, because it was a 2-part, 3-hour interview. And I think most of them, even if they disagree with you, they'll lighten up on you're just a cocky asshole. Yeah,
it's so crazy. Anybody, so many people that I've spoken with, and certainly I agree with this. So many people would say things completely uninformed. They're like, "Oh, those guys are so cocky," or they just did it to be famous.
Right.
And it's everybody who knows anything says, well, those people don't know Hayden Kennedy. They've obviously never met the guy.
Well, and they did do it to be cocky in a way, because it was a cocky maneuver.
Totally,
it had to be someone like that. But
I think there's an arrogance involved in alpine climbing in the first place, man. Who the fuck walks up to some 5,000-foot tall thing with a 15-pound backpack on and doesn't have a little bit of arrogance in them? I've got it. Everyone's got it. It depends on how it comes out.
So, but the moral of it is that in the end, and Hayden's told me this, it helped. It helped kind of clear the air a little bit. I got emails where people said that exact thing. I disagree with him still, but at least I've heard his side, and it's sort of reasonable. And anyway, and it also kind of put the Enormocast on the map in a way, because it was one thing that people really wanted to tune into, and still do. Actually, I still get emails about it, even though it's a couple years old.
Those were such good episodes, man. They really were. Your listeners should go back and listen to them if they haven't, if they're interested in the topic.
Well, and if you're interested in the topic, and what I guess I was going to get to is that we tried to put Maestri and what went on, not just again on the compressor route, but also in his previous claim or attempt or alleged ascent, into perspective. And a lot of people don't have that perspective of what the compressor route actually was and how it fit into this raging controversy at the time, because it wasn't simply that in the old days they did things different. In the modern age, not at all. It didn't fit in even then.
Nope.
And so this book, and you built, and you talk about this even in the narrative, but also if you look at the bibliography, it's clear you built on all these different things that had been done and said about it. But it's the whole operation. You put it all into perspective, and I think anybody who and everybody's calmed down to a certain, not everybody, but most people have calmed down about the chopping. But
this is not Vietnam, Walter.
If hearing me talk about it again is getting your hackles up, then you have to read this book, because this is another piece of the puzzle, and it was a more complex puzzle than two cocky kids wanting to destroy the past. And you really get into it. And so let me just have you tell me what the book is about.
The book is basically sort of a weighted history of Cerro Torre. It's not a comprehensive history. It's heavily weighted toward the effects of this guy Cesare Maestri, and it dates back to the 50s and actually even before. And I've heard it said that history is a series of connected events, and that's certainly true on Cerro Torre. And I think that on Cerro Torre that the connected events are just more bizarre than almost any mountain on Earth. And so it makes for a fascinating story, and that's kind of what drew me. And so I tried to weave together the narrative of that influence that began in the 50s and in a way even began before. I mean, it even began in post-war Italy in one way of thinking that's really not that much of a stretch, and how that influence continued to this very day. And then so intertwined there is like, why do we even go to the mountains? What is it that we value? What is it that we're looking for? And then also in the book, because I'm so used to writing about myself, like any climber, I'm a narcissist, and so I want to interweave my personal travels while I was kind of investigating and researching the book, and 7 different countries I interviewed people in, and my selected bibliography is, I think, 256 entries. A lot more shaped my thinking.
The thing that it hinges on, and you actually just pronounce his name. What is it?
Well, the correct pronunciation, as near I can do, because I don't speak Italian, is Cesare Maestri. So,
he claimed to have climbed Cerro Torre in 1959.
Correct.
Went up there with an Austrian named Tony Egger. Okay. And basically, and another guy, what's his first name?
Cesarino Fava.
Okay. Fava, Egger, Maestri.
Right.
But Fava was basically a ground man who helped climb in the beginning of the route.
Yeah.
Disappeared onto it for what, 6 days or more or less?
Well, their final push supposedly was about 6 days round trip.
So this is the we can do allegedly, supposedly. This is sort of the reigning narrative.
Totally.
Comes down. Fava finds him on the glacier, whacked out.
Yep.
Lost his mind, and he basically
3 words: Tony.
Right.
How's that for Italian drama?
I don't want to laugh because the last episode I put a track from Tony on the 80s the vocal group. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Anyway,
that's awesome.
It was a weird coincidence.
Wow.
But nevertheless, so over the next few days or weeks or whatever, kind of had this amorphous story about how they had climbed Cerro Torre essentially on the north side after having started on east side, crossed over the Col of Conquests, and then
took a left.
And Egger died on the ascent.
On the descent.
On the descent.
Supposedly. Right.
Was being lowered, and avalanche swept him off the end of the rope.
Being lowered is the long time narrative.
Right.
Once you dig a little deeper, it's not the same narrative that was the original story.
Okay.
So many contradictions.
Pretty quickly, a lot of people started questioning the ascent and the veracity of what he told and the changing things. He returns in 1970 to do the compressor route, shows up with a 400-pound gas-powered compressor and, more or less drills himself up the wall over a protracted period, putting bolts in. Anywhere, I've seen 300, I've seen 400, 420.
Somewhere in there. No one's actually counted, right?
And just jams the route straight up the face, supposedly to prove that he could climb Cerro Torre.
I will humiliate them, and they will be ashamed for having doubted me.
Comes down to, everywhere it seems outside of Italy, people scratching their heads at the very least, if not outright outraged about the way he did the climb, and also fails to prove anything because it was, he went from 1959.
Futuristic, so far ahead of the time.
To this day, would still be.
It took 47 years and dozens of attempts by the best alpinists of each subsequent generation until someone finally climbed that same face. That's how far. It was a half a century ahead of its time.
So, essentially, the book, again, is a history of Cerro Torre, as you just said, heavily focused on these routes, the inconsistency, and in some ways it comes down to this mystery. Did you pitch this? Did anyone approach you about doing the book? How did it come to be?
It was my idea. Me and Katie, my special lady friend. She and I were in.
She's not your special lady friend.
My special lady friend, man.
I thought you were just trying to help her conceive.
Is that yoga? We were in Ouray ice climbing, and it was right after Hayden and Jason chopped their route, and I'm kind of all engrossed in that whole thing, and Katie's like listening to me blab about it, and I was a senior editor for the American Alpine Journal. I worked there for 12 years, and so I was very familiar with the history of Cerro Torre and the influence of Maestri. And it's like, no, this actually isn't just 2012. This dates back to this, which is actually tied to this, and it's actually tied to this. And if you dig a little further, it's tied to this. And I think it was probably Katie's idea to say, like, hey, why don't you pitch a book idea? And so I did. I pitched it to Patagonia, who I work for, and they have a small publishing division, and I didn't pitch it anywhere else. You know? I'm just, because I'm just like some bumpkin climber up in Colorado. I'm not going to get the attention of anybody else, and and they said yeah. And
obviously it's in their name.
Yep.
All right, so that helps.
Yep.
But, they, in the whole controversy, Patagonia came out in heavy support of what those guys had done. Hearkening back to Chenard's, his whole ethos when he was climbing this movement, towards stoppers and away from
clean climbing
or towards clean climbing. So they ran an ad,
Yeah, they did.
So I think it probably. Again, it all sort of fitting together and coming together. Now, so once you'd pitched the idea,
and then I came to my senses and had to actually write the damn thing. Jesus, it was terrible, dude. I'm never writing again. It was way too much fucking work.
You're seeking these people. You were running up against walls here and there. You never did speak face to face, because
he hasn't given an interview about 1959 since early 2006.
Right.
I got the original audio and translated transcript of that interview, but he won't speak to anybody about it. He's bitter and angry. So I'm trying to figure out Cesare Maestri through his friends and through a letter that I wrote to him, and he wrote me a letter back, and then he calls our friend's house to make sure I got the letter.
Sure.
So he's saying he doesn't care, all these people mean nothing to me, and he's kind of a tragic figure in a way,
He's certainly a tragic figure.
Absolutely.
It's not in a way.
Not in a way.
All the people that you talked to that knew him are he seems to appear print as this angry, get off my lawn guy, or in some of those appearances you talked about, like the bewildered old man not knowing what So you mentioned in the start of this thing talking about going way back to sort of post-World War II and the roots of this.
Which even goes before that to Mussolini and all that. I mean, there's a heavy historical influence in Italy as to how and why some people in Italy, at least in the Trentino region, because Italy's quite unique in the way it's got these almost like city-states, but there's a strong history going back to the first half of the century.
Right.
It is indeed fairly difficult for us to understand, and I had no idea going into it. And I don't want to try to come off as though I'm an expert in European history or anything like that, but the way Italy got completely annihilated in the first half of the 20th century, from Mussolini through going into World War II with Hitler and then switching to the Allied side, and they got bombed into oblivion. Italy felt completely wiped out, and the losses and the carnage there, it's kind of unfathomable to us. And then they were looking for things to unify them, which is quite understandable when you really think about it. And in the early 50s, there was still this big era of these nationalistic expeditions to try to plant the flag of their country on top of the highest peaks of the world. And in 1954, when a large Italian team made the first ascent of K2, it was such an event in Italy that 40,000 cheering countrymen and women were waiting at the port in Genoa for the Italian team when they came back, the climbing team. 40,000 people. One author who I quoted in my book, an Italian author, said something to the effect of, can't remember the quote off the top of my head, but it's basically, this was the first time in this century that Italy could wave the collective flag of victory over the ruins of defeat, or something like that. It was such an enormous thing to Italians. So they're looking for heroes. But the tie to the K2 expedition, which, as I just mentioned, the unifying feeling in Italy. So there was an interesting tie in that Maestri, who is undoubtedly one of Italy's finest climbers, but he was left off of the 54 K2 expedition for reasons that aren't completely clear, but point to basically political infighting, and he wasn't so much a team player. Maestri's the kind of person who we, as flag-waving Americans, we actually would love someone like this. I mean, he was a self-proclaimed anarchist, did his own thing, and those are probably the reasons why he almost always climbed solo. When he led, he said he always had to climb first on the rope. He would follow nobody. He took machismo to a whole nother level. So when I made love to a woman, I did so in the press-up position to strengthen my arms. Right.
Well, the dude in the Eiger Sanction, who's
your movie,
Freitag's banging his wife. That guy is modeled on Maestri.
No way.
Yeah.
I did not know that. I did not know that.
Yeah. Because he mentioned something about that.
Wow.
And
no idea.
Anyway.
Well, and so Maestri's this character, right? And he gets left off of the 54 expedition, which was, the 54 expedition to K2, that's the highest thing that an Italian climber could have had at the time. And we know that the expedition was totally flawed, and they completely screwed over Bonatti. All these things happened. But anyway, so Maestri was left off of it. In response, he went into his home range, the Brenta Dolomites, and in one day, free soloed up and down, the story goes, a number of peaks equaling the exact same vertical height of base camp to summit on K2.
Right.
And so Maestri was pretty bitter about that. He got left off that. But then around that time, there was a change happening in alpinism. And it was shifting to what we now consider alpinism, as opposed to the big siege-style mentality of, fixing ropes up, that conquest mentality of the highest peaks. So along the top-notch alpinists in Europe, they were looking to do things alpine style. And on these really awesome technical peaks. Lionel Terray and Guido Magnone in 1952, these French climbers made the first ascent of Fitzroy. From the top of Fitzroy, they looked over at Cerro Torre and said it was the most beautiful mountain they had ever seen and thought that it was probably impossible. Now, we climbers haven't changed that much. Someone says it's impossible, all of the top climbers are going to want to try and climb it. So for Maestri in the tight-knit Trentino region of northern Italy, which has always kind of been its own little separatist sort of thing, it's actually part of an autonomous region within Italy. So, Maestri, he's one of the top alpinists of the day. There's no greater thing you could do at the time than to climb Cerro Torre. So Maestri, as well as a team from the Lecco region, like Walter Benatti, Carlo Mori, these guys, they're all in competition for the first ascent of Cerro Torre. So Maestri, with a huge chip on his shoulder, feeling left out after K2, goes in 58 in competition with Benatti, returns in 59, has this story that they climbed it. Absolutely did not happen. But he comes back with this story, comes back to a huge parade. Suddenly he's a hero in Trentino. He's like, and you think about it, it's like, wait, that's so weird. Why is that such a big deal? Remember, post-war Italy, they're looking for heroes. The Trentino region, this autonomous, tight-knit region, a little bit separatist style in northern Italy, suddenly has this affiliation with someone who made what would still stand as the greatest ascent in history if it ever happened. So suddenly it's not that hard. It's not that much of a stretch in a way when you put yourself in that mindset to think of how these people could still believe in it. It's hard to let go of your heroes, right? I mean, look, I talked in the book a little bit about, the Lance Armstrong thing, right? And I talked about how I grew up in State College, Pennsylvania, home of Penn State football, and the horrendous things that happened there. And still, people in State College refuse to believe these horrific things that happened. And they're like trying to defend it. It's fucking crazy. Humans, that's the whole thing, man. Like, when it comes to human behavior, evidence is no match for belief.
It goes,
we can go on.
That, but I thought because you mentioned the Lance Armstrong thing in the book, and it's a really excellent analogy because, once everybody was suddenly like, oh yeah, he was doping, there was just multiple people that were like, yeah, I printed this article 10 years ago that talked about this, and the French had been talking about it in printing articles and evidence and for years and years and years.
But over in the U.S., we're all just like, no, he's never tested positive. Nothing else matters. He's our hero. Lance.
Right? And I think the sea change happened so quickly, because it really did sort of the scale tipped so far that everybody was like, oh yeah, I guess I did know that, So, and then he finally admitted it, which we don't have in this case. But so let's talk about a little bit about the 59 expedition. Those guys came down, they said it happened. There was, some grumbling or wait, what happened now? And these
just because it was so far out there. I mean, it's a little bit like saying you flew to the moon before a spaceship was invented, right? So at first the doubts were kind of theoretical, like it's just too hard, But, it was so far away back then. That's the crazy thing, man. You can never predict the future. And that's one of the many traps you set for yourself when you tell a lie. You have no idea of how you're going to be revealed in the future. At the time, it's so far. Patagonia was a legitimate expedition then. The town of El Chalten wasn't even established until 1985. I mean, they had no way of know. I mean, can you imagine them thinking that 100 people in a season would stand atop Cerro Torre? That happened in the 2012-13 season. There's no way they could possibly comprehend. So it's easy to imagine that, maybe they come up with this story, maybe it was to kind of honor their dead friend, maybe, with the brilliant side benefit of being a part of the greatest ascent in history, and nobody's ever going to know.
So let's talk about debunking that ascent. One of the big moments, again, you have 10, 15, whatever years, where everybody's just like, wow, it sounds like that couldn't have happened, but we don't, as far as we know, it did.
Give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
As climbers, we all want to believe in the impossible, right? You want to believe in your fellow climber.
Right, and, so people can rise beyond. And in one of his explanations, was that in those conditions, the face was covered in ice, and Tony Egger was like the world's greatest ice climber at the time. But nevertheless, I mean, it still was like...
It was actually a bad way to come up with a story, as I talk about in the equipment chapter. Mm-hmm. And part of the problem with not being able to see the future is you have no idea when you're making up a story about climbing something that would be grade 6 ice.
Right.
You have no idea that the tools that you have at the time it's impossible to climb that. The modern ice axe was still a decade away from being invented. I mean, it was truly impossible for anybody. Give Will Gadd that equipment right now, he wouldn't get off the ground.
Sure.
All respect to Will as a badass.
I mean, I kind of was explaining to somebody, like, when race cars only went 90 miles an hour, it's like claiming that you went 150.
Yes,
it's like, it's just,
and with ice
it's not
climbing,
like you put the right mixture of gas, or you were just a better driver,
It's such a good analogy. And that's the thing with ice climbing. I mean, that's why it almost would have been a better story to go the complete opposite direction and say that a freak storm came and melted out all of like the mushrooms up top and everything. Because with rock climbing, I mean, certainly, of course, sticky rubber cams, all those things make a difference. But you're still basically using your fingers and toes. I mean, they climb over in Germany, like around 1910, they climbed like 5'10". Right. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Ice climbing is so dependent on the equipment. I mean, whereas with rock climbing, fingers and toes, maybe someone's a total freak. Maybe they were able to climb 5'12" and 19 whatever or something. Ice climbing, if you don't have the right tools, you can't even get off the ground.
Right.
I mean, literally, literally, go with a pair of bedroom slippers up to like a water ice 2 climb, the easiest climb, in a pair of bedroom slippers, and tell me how far you get. You won't be able to leave the ground.
So the first real concrete evidence occurs when those guys try to climb Torrey Egger,
Danini, and those guys.
Yeah,
yep, Danini, Bragg, and Wilson.
Yeah,
yep.
Tell me about that, because I remember this was something that did come up quite a long time ago, and was like a little blip on the wait a minute radar. Yep. And I'm sure some people were really eager to talk to those guys as soon as they came down about what they found. So
yeah. Well, what happened was, the first people to ever actually repeat the terrain that Maestri claims they climbed, that was Jim Danini, John Bragg, and Jay Wilson. And so they're making the first ascent of Torrey Egger. And to understand a little bit how this relates, remember that on this aspect, Torrey Egger and Cerro Torre share this high col that Maestri had named the Col of Conquest. And basically, if you're looking at it from the east, you go up to the Col of Conquest, you take a left if you're climbing Cerro Torre, you take a right if you're climbing Torrey Egger. And so they were the first to repeat the terrain up to the Col of Conquest. And they went there believing Maestri. They completely believed the story. And the first 1,000 feet, about 300 meters to this triangular snowfield, real prominent landmark, they're seeing artifacts everywhere. Danini told me it was like a walk through history, and he's just blown away because he's like a student of history, and he had read all these stories. They're seeing these old fixed ropes, old fixed pitons, everything. And then above there, nothing, absolutely nothing. They're seeing stuff, 100 artifacts or so in the first 1,000 feet, and then they don't see anything.
Pitons, wood, because they use the wood
old
wedges.
Wooden wedges, some wood, some metal, fixed ropes, all kinds of stuff, and then absolutely nothing, which is a little weird, right? Yeah. But they're trying to think, hey, let's give the guy the benefit of the doubt. Maybe we climb this corner to the right, maybe they climb this one to the left, even though why would they do that? This is obviously the path of least resistance. Well, anyway, maybe they just got their game on real good and started firing up things. But then the thing that really was pretty damning was the terrain. So from below, it looked a certain way. And that's the way Maestri described it, is the way it looked from below. Now,
but he described it as if he'd climbed it.
Right. So, he's looking at it from below. Yeah, he's describing it as if he climbed it, and his description matches the way it appears if you're standing at the base of the route looking up. Now, anybody who's done any climbing on a big, complicated face knows that it's the way it actually climbs is not always the way it looks, right? So that big head wall, in fact, this is a true example, that this one spot where from below there's this fierce-looking head wall, and Denis is thinking, man, that thing's going to be the crux. How in the hell? Well, those guys did it in '59, and we have all this Yosemite experience. I guess we'll be able to figure it out. You get up to the base of that head wall, and there's a hidden passage that juts around to the right, and it's like fourth class. Maestry's descriptions never mention any of the way it actually climbed to the Core Conquest. He gave meticulous descriptions in that initial 1,000 feet that were very difficult for them, where there's all kinds of artifacts. And then above, his descriptions got a little more vague and were only as it appears from below, but it climbed completely differently. As Danini said, he's like, we weren't even to the Kola Conquest, and we knew that Maestri hadn't climbed it, that it was a complete lie. When we're climbing on mountains, it's interesting, we're looking at the most appealing feature we're looking to climb, but once we get on there and we're looking for that feature, we're not playing eliminate. It's not like we're going to the spot for a bouldering session. You're looking for the easiest way within that particular feature, and most certainly climbers of 1959 were doing so. They weren't playing eliminate up on the quote-unquote impossible.
Yeah, we could go up this fourth class, but no, let's try to do
let's try the 512 way.
Maestri claimed that above there was actually the easy part of the climb, the rest of the climb.
Which is just absurd. I mean, he just says that it was coated in this like fragile coat of ice, and Egger just danced up it. He said it was like one of the easiest climbs of his life, and for the first time in his career, he says that he basically relinquished almost all of the leading to Tony Egger. And it's a, I guess, gentlemanly way of putting it when your partner died, but it simply didn't happen. I mean, and that was the thing. That's one thing that a lot of people trying to defend Maestri had hung their hat on, is that, well, if this mythical sheet of ice on the North Face, which is the sunny side in South America, if this mythical sheet of ice actually formed, maybe they could have climbed it. A lot of people have said that over the years. And so no one's ever seen that sheet of ice form again. It gets covered in this plastery rime that's totally worthless. But the weird thing is, and a lot of times there are these things that people just overlook, that get overlooked throughout the course of history. And one of them that I had never seen written about anywhere else, but that I have a whole chapter on it in my book, once I started digging, it is this notion that we talked about earlier, which is like, wait a second, if it was a sheet of ice, it's so steep that it would be like grade 5 and grade 6 ice. And in 1959, they weren't climbing grade 5 and grade 6 ice. And not because they weren't good climbers. They were incredibly bold and talented climbers with very good technique. But the modern ice axe wasn't invented until late 60s, circa 1970. And so historians have called it the ice axe revolution, that the standards of ice climbing just rose exponentially around the time of the modern ice axe. Routes that used to take weeks of sieging, people are repeating in a day, 2 days, things like that. There's probably nothing in the course of climbing equipment that had such a monumental shift. Probably not even the Friend had such a, camming devices probably didn't have such a monumental shift in standards. Because this actually allowed you to climb vertical ice with 2 ice axes with this curved pick. And this curved pick was key. It kept your ice axe from popping out. Up until then, they climbed ice with this old school alpenstock, the 80 centimeter wooden axe with a straight pick that came out perpendicular, usually didn't have teeth, sometimes had tiny little teeth. It's like a frickin' sewing awl, and they were chopping handholds. They would balance and chop handholds, move up in perfect balance. Incredible skill required to do that. But the high end of the thing, I went back and researched Gaston Rebuffat's books. He had one, conveniently enough, published in 1959, another one in 1970. about the modern techniques of snow and ice climbing. And severe steepness grades, like top end of the scale, was extreme difficulties, like 50 to 60 degrees.
Right.
The modern ice axe changed ice climbing, and that didn't happen for another decade after Maestri's claim of he and Tony Egger racing up this sheet of ice on the north face of Cerro Torre. So it truly was impossible. So as climbers, we like to think anything is possible. But theoretically, iced over north face of Cerro Torre in 1959 was impossible. Not just for Cesare Maestri and Tony Egger, it was impossible for anybody.
Right.
Nobody in the world in 1959 with the equipment they had could climb it.
So let's talk a little bit more about then physical evidence. So those guys, I mean, they didn't go any higher on the wall.
Right.
We're talking Donini and his crew, because they turned right.
Then they turned right.
And went up. Torre Egger, right?
Yep.
Named for Tony
Yeah,
Egger.
classy move. They
Right.
left a carabiner that they had found with Egger's remains. They left it on the summit.
Okay. So Donini's ascent was sort of the first physical evidence that comes back, right?
Yes.
And, I mean, what year was that?
That was
Can you pull it off the top of your head?
76, I believe.
Yeah, so this is after a compressor and everything. So this thing has sat there for 15, 16 years without anybody going over there to look at the 1959 ascent. Those guys, as you said, were, even while climbing it, were, okay, this wasn't climbed.
Yeah.
Had made up their minds.
And they went into it believing Maestri. That's an important note. It's not like they had it out for the guy or something.
So finally, that face in that vicinity of the upper part of the route was climbed when?
2005. November 2005. Rollo Garibaldi, who we all know is the man. That would be the ultimate fucking coup for your show, dude, if you could ever get Rollo on. That guy is like, it's like the I'm not worthy Wayne's World thing. Yeah, Rollo's the man.
You're as good an in as I got. Well, actually, no, I have a better in with Rollo.
Good.
So
okay, good.
No, actually, Rollo knows who I am.
We'll get. I'll try to apply subtle pressure in my little way. Not that anyone can pressure Rollo. He's the man. I mean, he's so highly regarded. He's for his knowledge and for his climbing and the way he does things. He's a good-looking guy, man.
Yep.
Yeah, no doubt. So it was Rollo Garibaldi, Alessandro Beltrami, who I interviewed in Italy, and Ermanno Salvatierra, who I stayed at Ermanno's house, went climbing with them, hung out with him. Ermanno is kind of known as Mr.
Italian,
Cerro
right?
Torre.
Also,
Italian also. Ermanno, fascinating dude, man. I mean, he's, without question, Cerro Torre's greatest climber of all time. He grew up about 10 miles down valley from Maestri. In a sense, has basically lived in Maestri's shadow. Grew up believing Maestri, defending Maestri. Wanted nothing more than to believe the Maestri story.
Right.
He started to look at the evidence and knew it was kind of specious. But he had said, before he went to Cerro Torre with Rollo and Ale in 2005, he had said, if I can find only one piton of theirs high on the face, I will fling it in the world's face, and most of all my own. He wanted nothing more than to believe.
Well, and in various, and these things changed over time, the descriptions that Maestri made of the route, but in most of his accounts, he talked about having placed bolts, and so there should have been evidence that wouldn't just fall out.
And you got to get down, right?
Right.
Yeah. Where's the wrap anchors?
Well, they could just
V-thread,
right?
Yeah. I don't think the Abalikov or V-thread had been invented yet, but they could wrap off bollards, right? So
bollards,
anything
Hundreds
conceivable, people are people who want to believe are making.
He says there's some bolts here and there.
Right.
Those guys are headed up there. Salvatierra's like, I'm gonna if I find just a crampon scratch.
Right. Yeah. And Ermanno, I mean, God, one of the regrets I have in writing this book is that I did not give enough credit to the stories, the stories of some of the people who went to Cerro Torre quietly as badasses, did their shit, and then left without creating a mess.
Right.
Silvo Caro, Slovenia. I spent time at his house in Slovenia. My God, I mean, what a badass. God, one night, brief interlude, dude. we're at his place in Osp. It was like an old castle, basically, from forever ago. It's right by the sport climbing in Osp. Have you been on it?
No, but I just love it because all these like rad climbers live in castles.
It's so good. Silvo, so I'm going sport climbing with Silvo Caro in Osp, Slovenia. Phenomenal sport climbing right there. He's got this old like castle that, I mean, not really a castle. It's not like Reinhold Messner, you know. And like Silvo's like a working class dude, humble, low key, and the hardest motherfucker. He and Hermano are probably the hardest people I've ever met.
Sure.
And so cool. And one night over, after the first night I was there, after sport climbing with Silvo for the day, we're drinking wine, and he starts telling me what it was like in the 80s and 90s when Slovenian alpinism was the world standard.
Right.
They did things that still to this day haven't been equaled. But most of his friends are dead. You know, they all died in the mountains. And Silvo starts talking to me, and I'm just like, hushed silence. Like you could hear a fucking pin drop, man. Like he's got this 1,000-yard stare, and he's like looking into his wine glass. And he's telling me what it's like on like Bagarathi 3 when, you know, they're walking up to the face. There's craters in the snow from rockfall, and they're just going for it. And I mean, just that, it felt like sitting there listening to like Moses tell you what it was like with the tablets or something, you know. So anyway,
well, I didn't get online and like defend Hayden or those guys or the act or whatever they did. But what I tried privately when I would explain it to people that weren't super clear on it, like, is that Maestri was not cut from that mold.
Right.
And we have a tendency to think that because that's our American climbing heroes are cut from that mold, we want them to be humble. We want them to be relatively quiet. You know, we want them to be.
He was a showman.
You know, and plus the history of mountaineering is those people are the people we revere.
Right.
He wasn't that person, and nothing points it out more than Bonatti, who was that guy.
Yeah.
And those guys were contemporaries.
Absolutely.
And Bonatti literally backed off of Sartori to get out of competition with this guy.
Yep, exactly. Bonatti basically bowed out. He wasn't into, you know,
he certainly was climbed for God and country and all that sort of thing. But he, you know, fits the mold of this man of the mountains, this guy who just wants to climb. In an era when, you know, I think probably the brash person was revered in a way that we don't anymore. You know what I'm saying?
I wonder. You know, it's interesting because as much as I've talked about how these people in Italy defend Maestri, I mean, not also to be fair, you know, the first doubts about 59 came from Carlo Mori, who was with Bonatti in 58 trying. So there were definitely, Maestri isn't beloved in all of Italy, but in the Trentino, because he's a polarizing dude. You know, he's like a love it or hate it sort of person.
Sure.
But in the Trentino region, he's a bit of a hero. And that, I guess, I took us off on a tangent, but just down valley from is where Hermano lives, right? And so, Hermano wanted nothing more than to basically vindicate Maestri. I think it must have been complicated for Hermano, you know? Yeah, I think he knew that Maestri didn't do it, but he was going there, he was hoping to vindicate basically his hero in the Trentino region. But Hermano is such a stand-up guy that when he came back, if you ever want someone to lie for you, don't ask Hermano, don't ask Rollo. You know, those are not the sorts of people who are going to come back and like lie for you. And Hermano came back and said, you know, I found nothing. I found no trace of Maestri. The terrain does not match his description. We didn't even find his rappel anchors. You know, I mean, it just... And Rollo had always been outspoken about it since his meticulously researched article, A Mountain Unveiled, that ran in the American Alpine Journal. And they came back and told the truth about what they found and what they didn't find. Maestri hires a lawyer and threatens to sue them for defamation. I mean, it's really bizarre when Maestri still got all this support. And even in 2009 at the Trento Film Festival, they're honoring Maestri for the 50th anniversary of the first ascent of Sartori. It's bizarre, man. It's so weird. Human belief. Like, I don't know what other people think the book is about. It's probably about a bunch of different things depending on how you look at it, how you interpret it. To me, the book is kind of about belief, and it manifests itself in different ways. That we talked earlier about, I was saying how like we're all kind of arrogant alpinists to walk up to something and think you can do it. You got to have some belief in that regard too, man. Yeah, motherfucker, you better believe if you're going to go up on Cerro Torre wearing a 10-pound backpack or whatever, like Colin and I did on our climb. I look back at that, I'm like, man, what the hell? Yeah, good thing we didn't get caught by a storm.
Right.
You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, that's a self-belief, and then there's a thread of belief in your heroes, and we're all an influence of our culture here in America. Capital M. We all want to believe we're so independent. That's kind of bullshit, you know.
Right.
We're all influenced by our culture.
There's always that saying of like, don't get too close to your heroes because you may not like what you find, and it extends to artists and pop culture.
Absolutely.
Without naming names, there's climbers out there who fit in history in a certain way, and then you meet them and you're just like, wow, this isn't that great. And
I kind of wish I liked it better in my head, the way I had built them up to be. Yes.
So these guys go up there, they don't find anything anywhere, and they were generally in the same vicinity and looking like not,
they're looking,
you know. And it occurred to me while you were saying that, because I want to ask you like why this matters. And I'm sure you didn't embark on this thing for no particular reason, so hopefully
dude, I don't got that much going on in my life, man, you know.
Hopefully there is some reason beyond, I don't know, the huge paycheck, right?
Anyway, I'm still drinking like moderate level tequila.
Nice. Oh, that's a shame.
100% agave. You gotta draw the line somewhere, dude.
Good.
Yeah.
So, you know, but that's the weird thing, is I just realized like the kind of poison that it laid, right?
Yes.
That first of all, if he didn't climb it, then you know all these guys that were you know maybe over the next 10 years honing their craft to have been able to climb the first ascent, but you know, so it took away that dream for a generation, right? Or even long. I mean, even now, like,
well, it's had an ongoing influence.
And then you know, and then the fact that you know this 1970, this compressor route, like creates, even at the time, all this ill will, you know, and by all accounts from reading everything he said, he meant to do that. That was an act, and that's kind of like, again, back during the chopping controversy, what I try to explain to people, like, he was not just this happy-go-lucky hippie dude
thinking
that went,
this is the way we do climbing.
He went there to fuck with everybody. And said it out loud, like he wasn't.
And I mean, that's kind of part of why I kind of almost think like, well, when Colin and I, after we did our route and we were wrapping down the compressor, I mean, you know, we had been going for a couple days straight, and so I'm exhausted and rubbed raw. I had this weird, almost like sense of admiration in a weird way for Maestri when I'm going down the compressor route, because I'm just like, you know, it was one thing to have read about it and another to actually see it.
Sure.
And I was like, I had this almost weird admiration for him in a way, for his like crazy determination, his like maniacal obsession. Yeah, there are other people who've been obsessed and done horrible things, but like, to be clear, I mean, he's not like Hitler or something. I mean, he didn't commit crimes against humanity when he bolted this thing, right? But, you know, and I don't agree with it at all, and I was fully in support of Hayden and Jason's actions. But it's pretty wild. Like, Maestri, it's easy to see how people can say they love him and hate him. And for me, I kind of have both of those.
Sure.
You know? What an interesting guy.
But then it continues, because here's this guy who's half worshiping him and half, and then he has to go up there, and you can only imagine that for the second half of that climb, this is in his head, this is in his brain for all those guys, like, you know. And there's Rollo, like, already made up his mind, and there's what's his first name? Hermano, like hoping hopes to find this. And I mean, I don't know what
Alessandro worked. I don't know if he still works there, but he's a certified mountain guide in the same guide's office where Maestri was still like guiding like celebrity treks.
Right. So
you know?
Then I think like, well, what kind of, you know, little bit of conflict did it create between Rollo and him? Who knows? Because here's Rollo who had long since made up his mind, declared it.
Well, Rollo's hard with the evidence, man. I mean, Rollo bases decisions on evidence.
Just the poison of the whole situation that it left behind.
There's so much human conflict and drama. And then one of the interesting things is that, so I was talking with this Argentine climber and writer the other day who helped me out with some ideas and gave me a photo of El Chalten in 1959. It's in the book in color. It's like there's one house in El Chalten.
Oh, yeah.
And, this guy Sebastian. And we were talking, and Sebastian had a great perspective. I mean, it's one I had thought of, but he put it really perfectly. I wish I had notes with me because I was writing as he was talking. But like how it's so fascinating that Maestri and Fava went to the mountains probably for a lot of the same reasons that we all go for freedom. And then you tell this lie, and you become a prisoner of this lie for the rest of your fucking life, man.
Right.
And in part, with Maestri, because it was such a great lie, such a huge lie, great in grandeur and scale, is what I mean. And then it's such a big lie that every 10 years in your province, they hold a celebration for you.
Right.
Even if, I don't know if the man has the humility and the honesty to ever want to come clean, but even if he did, could he? I mean, and all these people, when I'm in the Trentino region talking to people, and I'm talking to his defenders, and I'm reading comments about him, and there's all these things about the humanity of Maestri, and he's this man, it's a little weird because the guy was basically a complete asshole for like 50 years or whatever to anybody who was doubting him. And then at a certain point, he becomes an old man, and you have to have sympathy for the old man. It's like, wait, this doesn't make sense. You get to be an asshole for all these years to anybody who's calling for the truth, and then you should get a pass because now you're old, But then, even if he wanted to come clean, I don't know if he could. And all these people who are saying that they're defending Maestri, I think they're actually defending something within themselves, an idea that they have, a part of their identity that it touches. They're not defending Maestri. No more than the people who were defending Lance Armstrong were defending Lance. They were defending this idea, this ideal that they had about their heroes.
Right.
And in a way, Maestri becomes a victim, but a victim of his own doing, right?
Sure.
He is entrapped by his own lie.
Uh-huh. Well, now, you have a couple chapters, essentially the story of a rescue that had been told for 40 years or however long it had been told. There's a lot of evidence that it went exactly opposite. And the rescuers, those who claimed to have tried to rescue this guy who died, were in fact being rescued at the time that it happened. And you use it to illustrate, like, well, liars are liars, and here are these people who maybe have this history, and it's not not like they had this one lapse. That chapter made me think of Maestri and all these amazing claims of these solo climbs. Always solo climbs.
Right.
That was he was super famous for these solos that he had made.
And some of them were witnessed for sure.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Right.
Some of them are witnessed for sure.
But in an era it's like poor Alex Honnold, he can't roll out of his bed, out of his van with his hair messed up without someone taking his goddamn photo and videoing him.
It's interesting,
but this is an era where you could disappear into the Dolomites and come back and be
tell a story. Oh, hey, what were you doing the last few days? Oh, I was climbing the Enormo Dome.
Yeah, the
I soloed it out.
Yeah, soloed it out. Totally,
Exactly. It's so interesting. And Maestri's sole defense, if you would even call it that, his only address of the people who are saying, hey, how do you account for this with 1959?
You have to take my word for it.
Yeah, you have to take my word for it. He repeats over and over, if you doubt me, you doubt the history of mountaineering. Which is a little bit ridiculous because I think literally and conceptually, literally, climbing has plenty of lies in its history.
Sure.
You look at, the Mount McKinley Denali thing. I mean, there's a lot of them, right? Exploration. David Roberts wrote a book, and I quoted from it, called Great Exploration Hoaxes.
Sure, I read it.
Yeah. So, but then also conceptually, what is up with this ridiculous notion that climbers are above the rest of humanity, meaning the rest of humanity, we know that people lie. We know that humans lie. Exactly. And in fact, if you want to take it, I think most things in life happen in degrees. But, we all lie. We lied to our kids. It was just Christmas the other day, right? Hey, yeah, Santa Claus came down the chimney, Johnny. Come on, little Johnny. We lie all the time. You're late for work, but the real reason is you overslept. And you say, oh, well, I got stuck in traffic.
I don't look at porn, baby. I never do.
Yeah, exactly. No. Exactly. Not me. No, those other guys, they're pigs.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So this notion that climbers are somehow above the rest of humanity,
sure,
it's purely pretentious bullshit.
The payoff is a big part of it too, because there is the pathological liar who just lies to lie, or can't help it. But the payoff to his lie to this it was
quite
enormous.
Greatest sent in history. He everyone I talk to in Italy is sure to then go on, or at least if they're a friend of Maestри's, to then go on and say, well, it wasn't only Serratore, he did all these other great things. He was undoubtedly a great climber. There's no question about that. That's verified. But the crowning achievement of his career never happened. Not even close to happen. Not even 25%.
The thing about the lies, though, and I think one of the reasons I think this is important, at least within climbing, is because I think it's pretty interesting that such a foundational climb within climbing, within alpinism or rock climbing or any of these things, turns out to be a lie.
Yeah.
It's pretty insane, actually, because then it starts to be, then it turns that on its head, because in one way he is right. And you talk about this, and the literature of the time talked about it. In the end, we have to take this person,
right?
And that is what we generally have done.
Yeah, unless compelling evidence suggests otherwise.
And most of us feel pretty good about that, and we all can. Oh yeah, but there was that one guy that did,
get
and
duped
that one guy
every now and then. Probably
Clue
more than
said
we
he
think.
climbed free rider, but we know he stepped on that piton and whatever.
He was at McDonald's. I know.
I did see him at Deegan's during that time.
Exactly.
But here is this thing that this is, in a lot of ways, again, if 59 had happened, like you said, it was like going to the moon.
Greatest climb in history.
In a lot of ways, it just calls to question the whole operation.
Dude, totally.
You know what I mean?
I've wondered so much, man.
It's okay, well, who else?
Oh my
is
God.
bullshit,
Well, it's kind of funny, but for a long time, long before even thinking of this idea of the book or even knowing anything about Maestri, I had always said that, with some of the climbs, some of the experiences that I've had, it's I'm glad I have photos, because otherwise I just wouldn't even believe it myself sometimes. It's I wonder how much. I suspect we've been duped a lot more than we think.
Bingo. That's what I'm getting at. Right.
Yeah.
Or
people lie.
Well, you even had the incident, you talk about in the book with, what was the name of that mountain you and Josh did? And
Shingu Charpa. My own first-hand experience with climbing liars.
Some guys that are Ukrainians that claim to have climbed it.
Yeah.
And
they didn't. They were lying,
Well, it made me realize that there's this hubris involved in it that's so insane, and you said, that Maestri just no one will ever be back here. How is anyone ever going to verify this, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And even in a modern age, everybody has this tendency to think that we're at the apex,
right?
And this is the raddest it's ever going to get. And
it's ridiculous.
And so you had this team of Ukrainians, thinking that these guys, these two bumbly dudes,
these two bumbly American dudes, right? Exactly. They're not gonna in this. So. Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of.
And they claim to have
crazy.
climbed it before you.
Yeah. So we arrived in base camp in the Nagma Valley in Pakistan. Josh and I, north ridge of Shingu Charpa, striking line, terrible climbing, chalks fest.
Right. You talked on the last show.
And they claimed to have climbed it. We got there. They had already been in base camp for a little while. They had already attempted it once, and then they went up and said they went to the top. And at the top it turns a corner, and you can't see it from base camp, but you can see it from the village down valley.
And the villagers knew.
Yeah, the villagers knew, but because they've been watching with binoculars, they're fascinated by whoa, you guys, what the hell are you doing? They're just trying to survive in these villages. They came down, told us they had climbed it. A couple things seemed really suspicious at first, seemed really weird. And but Josh, no one wants to be a whiner,
Right.
And Josh and I, we shared whiskey with them in their cook tent, toasted congratulations to them, even though a couple things seemed really odd. But basically we were like, you know what, man, those guys, hats off, man, badass. They got it first, we didn't. But and that was an interesting time. I'm getting on a detour, I know, but I remember there sitting in base camp, and Josh and I are thinking, we're talking do we still want to climb this thing? And we both had this, we were both like, yeah, you know what, we came here because this is a beautiful line, and we want to climb this line. And yeah, of course we have egos. We wanted to be first,
right.
But that doesn't change the fact that we want to climb it. So we're going to give it our best and try to climb it. And we made this attempt, and retreated just below the top. And we thought, well, shit, they're better than we are, And it turns out that's certainly.
Has anybody climbed it?
Not the North Ridge. No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Oh, rad.
So it's
and then
still,
one of the guys came clean, right?
The young guy, the young rope gun. That was where the things got a little weird. That was one of several things that got a little weird. He was real quiet. We knew he was the rope gun of the team. He was real quiet while the older guy was being the spray lord and kind of telling some conflicting stories and stuff. And the young guy was just silent the whole time. And then they got nominated for the Pile d'Or. And right before that happened, he came. He couldn't take it anymore, and he publicized this thing. Said, we have no moral right to be among the nominees. Here's what really happened.
Yeah, right. So I mean,
usually someone breaks during when the live's
but there's
going
nobody
on.
to break.
That's
because the thing is, and actually, I wanted to wrap this up, but
yeah, good luck with me, right?
I keep wanting to go back because so Fava, he didn't climb. So is there a possibility that he is also of the, I believe, I mean, because clearly he had hero worship to Maestri.
Yes.
He invited, this is the greatest climber in the world. I'm going to bring him here.
Right.
It's a possibility he's not in on it.
It's possible. I'm suspicious of that. I don't have any way of knowing for sure.
Because you were talking about the one guy cracking, and so in this situation you've got two guys to
stayed loyal
crack.
to the end. Fava died in, I think it was 2008. He never broke. He always faithfully stood by Maestri's story. Or a cynic could say, is Maestri and Fava, what is it that they both have that's so important that they need to protect?
Right.
What really went on? And that, Chris, this is where we get. I'm glad you asked that, Chris.
Yeah. Because the question is what happened to Tony Egger?
Right. What happened to Tony Egger? How did Tony? Let's be blunt.
We know he died.
We know he died. How did Tony Egger die?
Right.
Because as I wrote about in the book, it did not. I don't know how he died, so I'm not casting blame, but it did not happen the way Maestri said.
Right.
And Tony Egger's. And Maestri and Fava went home, and they told a lie to Tony Egger's family about how their son died. Maybe it was just the idea of a glorious death. I think we could sympathize with that.
Sure, like the guy who dies in war.
Right,
and he died helping everybody.
Absolutely. And we all know that after everyone dies, they're the greatest fucking person ever. I can't wait till I die. People are going to think I'm awesome, right? Everyone talks about how great you are. Yeah, shit.
We'll see.
God damn it. Anyway, everyone's the greatest guy ever after they die, right? And but it's the evidence found with Egger's remains.
It doesn't add up to what they said.
No, it does not add up. It does not add up.
Plus Maestri's story about how he died changed.
Right, exactly. And that's one remaining mystery I really want to figure out.
But it's probably impossible.
It's probably impossible.
Unless there's some deathbed confession.
Unless there's a deathbed confession. Or I wondered about those initial 2 reports out of Argentina that presented what from the outside would seem no big deal, but to climbers, we all know the difference between being lowered and rappelling. Mm-hmm. It's not a mistake you would make.
Right.
You wouldn't be confused and think, "Oh, I was lowering my buddy." Or wait, was he rappelling? No,
right.
When he died.
Right.
No. I wanted to try to find the original documents that came out of Argentina, and I ran into dead ends. That they're probably gone.
Uh-huh.
But to be scrupulous, as I've tried to be with my research, you got to do it both ways. You can't just be scrupulous when things fit what you want it to be, right? So, in fairness, there could have been it could have been, there's all kinds of ways it could have happened. Anyone who's worked in media knows that this can happen. And in reporting, maybe there was a relayer from the Chaltén Massif who transmitted the story in the 2 different sources, one in the U.S. and one in Argentina, actually came from that same erroneous initial source. That could have happened, but that is but one of a myriad of things that simply do not add up, and that's part of why I think this matters. So you wanted to talk about why it matters? Yeah,
that's my last question because we're getting on here. So so. It's a sort of fun or useful caveat to talk about how climbing's not curing cancer and it's not all that important, and we're all, mostly a bunch of affluent white people that do it, and this and that and the other thing, and I've used it on the Enormocast. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm also willing to go to the mat that somehow climbing is important. I don't know why, but it is, and here's this. Again, it's not a widely known story outside of climbing. It may never be. Let's cross our fingers that people get interested in it and buy your book. But
I just want Will Ferrell to star in the movie. Yeah. He and Danny McBride, Kenny Powers. I want. Can Kenny Powers play me?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. You'll be the narrator. He'll be the narrator. But so we've got this thing that. Well, let me say this too. I can only imagine that in between 59, then you get the thing in 70, and then even Danini's thing. 5 years later, him and his crew, John Bragg, right,
and Jay actually, Wilson,
yeah, and those guys, and Bragg was pretty vocal about it too. It seems like. Those guys lob a shell into it, but it still doesn't affect.
Right.
And I just get this feeling that there's a point at which everybody was just kind of like, whatever. He's an old man now. Let's leave him alone. Even climbers, right?
And
yet it doesn't stay down. It's and then other people had ventured up there before those guys did the Viento. The route that they did on the
El Arca de los Vientos.
There's something about them finding some other team finding a piton.
Right.
But it was still bubbling there. So obviously it does matter, but I think even climbers might be like, well,
why does this really matter?
Right.
Who cares, right? Yeah. On the one hand, I think just fundamentally the truth matters, and I don't think that really needs a whole lot of defending as a general principle. People can disagree with me if they want, and that's that's their prerogative. But I do think the truth matters in a general sense. Also, the history of Cerro Torre has been indelibly influenced by a lie. 1959, because that led to 1970, which was the compressed route. This whole chain reaction of things were influenced by a lie, which I think bears examination, because if you spread that concept out to larger society, what do we want to live in a world where the truth doesn't matter? You'd say, okay, that's just climbing. Oh, all right, well, that's a mighty slippery slope to say that it's okay to lie in climbing but not in other areas. But yeah, I mean, I guess I can see that. Like, oh, why don't you guys go and get a real life? Okay, that's fair enough. I've been told that plenty of times.
This is a real life.
I do think that
this is the real life.
This is the
Don't
real
tell
life.
me it's not.
So we care about climbing. Passion matters. I mean, piano.
I risked my life to be here tonight.
You did. The driving was sketchy.
Anyway.
Piano. People who I've known people who play beautifully. Play the piano. I think that matters. I don't know shit about music, but I think the passion in life matters. What your job at the bank working for some corporate criminals really fucking matters? No, it doesn't. I mean, so if we want to extend it, then nothing matters, right? And I'm not the nihilist.
I was about to say that. I was
I know.
like,
nice
nihilist,
weasel.
Donnie.
But then, so these are all these men are cowards, Donnie. So these are all kind of philosophical things that I think we could probably talk in circles about, and I think it's interesting. There's one thing that I think where it absolutely does matter, and I will argue face to face with anyone who wants to challenge me on this, which is, I don't think it's okay to go home and lie to a dead man's family. I don't think it's okay to allow this unexplained death. Tony Egger did not die the way Maestri said he died. Tony Egger's sister, Stephanie, is still alive in Austria. She was a little girl when Maestri came home to Italy and then visited Austria and came and visited the family and lied to their faces about how Egger had died. She knew at the time, as a young girl, that it didn't happen that way. Ever since, she's known that it hasn't happened the way they said. She's still waiting for an answer. Mm-hmm. The people in Italy who are defending Maestri, and Maestri himself, if he was this great, courageous climber, it takes a hell of a lot more courage to come out and come clean and go tell Stephanie Egger how her brother died.
Right.
Takes a hell of a lot more courage to do that than it does any climb. I think there's a demand for honesty there that actually does matter.
Right.
And that's not the reason I got into this book or whatever. I mean, I got into it for self-serving reasons because I thought it was an interesting story and I thought I wanted to write a book, which was a terrible idea because it was way too much work and I'm a little bit like the dude. I like my leisure time. But, so yeah, I got into it for self-serving reasons. And in the end, there's this big fantasy about Cerro Torre, about how it was climbed in 1959 that some people cling to. And they're clinging to have this relationship with a fantasy. And I have a lot more respect for those people who want to have a relationship with reality. And maybe fantasy and reality meet in my stupid little world as a little climber bum, is that I have this really weird fantasy that will never come true, but it's a fantasy that based out of this book and all this research and stuff, that there will be enough pressure on Maestri that comes from all of this evidence that finally he'll give Tony Egger's family an honest answer as to how he died. Mm-hmm. So if someone wants to tell me that doesn't matter, I'll listen and we can debate that.
So the book is The Tower. Check it out. Again, if you have an opinion about the chopping of the compressor route, which I think most everybody I know did, then this is another piece of the puzzle. And I'd like to think that my book is about quite a bit more than just what happened in. Well, if you like mountaineering literature and there's great photos and all these rad dudes like you just talked about.
Even if you can't read, the photos are pretty cool.
Yeah, there's quite
we are climbers, so our reading abilities are limited.
All right, well, thanks for sitting down, Kelly, and
thanks,
hopefully it'll be less than 2 years before you're back on the show. So.
Yeah, man, keep up the good work. I love the show. Thanks.
All right, folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for being around. Thanks for getting on board for the 4th year of the Enormocast, the beginning of the 4th year. Listen, if you're just showing up or if you've been here for a while, there are ways to help out the Enormocast. You can go to enormocast.com and click on the Help Out tab and do what it takes to keep this thing rolling, making it more popular and therefore more valuable. And also, make sure and tell your friends. There are climbers out there that have not heard this. I know it's hard to believe. So hard to believe. But yeah, tell your friends about the Enormocast. Make them listen. Shove it in their heads. Okay. Thanks, you guys. Happy New Year. Check your knot. And if you happen to be at the Ure Ice Fest in a couple days, look around. I'm going to be there. Come say hi.
You got John Bouchard in New Hampshire, for example, you know? When you got New England, it's the greatest climbing mountainous state in the whole entire world.
Right.
It's, you know, I mean, first ascent of Black Dyke, Marty, that was the greatest ascent in the history of climbing. Are you aware of that?